Yo, what is going on, everybody? We are back at it with my week 5 wide receiver rankings. I have already uploaded my top 30 running back video, so if you haven't seen that yet, make sure you go check it out. Now, like I mentioned in the last one, we do have some people on bye this week. So we got the Browns, we got the Buccaneers, the Chargers, and the Seahawks. So that means there's a lot of people that aren't going to be on this list. Guys like Keenan Allen, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, Amari Cooper. Obviously, all of them are not going to be ranked here. Just want to get that out of the way before we get into these rankings. T. Higgins also got hurt this past week, so I don't think he'll be playing this upcoming week. The Rams also just opened up Cooper Kupp's 21-day practice window to return, so there is a possibility that he plays this week. I personally don't think he's going to, so I'm going to rank him like he's not. But I do want to mention that possibility because that could definitely change as the week goes on. If he does play, I don't think that he'll get that full allotment of snaps, but probably you're going to be wanting to play him if he is in there. So regardless, I still think that Puka is going to be good, and I'm going to be ranking him here as if Cooper Kupp is not playing. Now let's get into these rankings. First up, to nobody's surprise, going to be Justin Jefferson. I'm also just going to throw Tyreek Hill up here because they're pretty much going to be the top 2 guys every single week. And who's 1, who's 2, just going to be matchup dependent, really. Regardless, it doesn't really matter. You're going to have them in your lineups. They're going to be top options every single week. So we're not really even going to talk about them. We're just going to move on to the next tier. And to start it off, at my wide receiver 3, we're going to have Stephon Diggs here. Went absolutely crazy this past week. Had 3 touchdowns on only 6 receptions. And honestly, he's been dominating every single week this year. So I just only think that's going to continue playing the Jacksonville Jaguars, who are pretty middle of the road matchup. The one weird thing here is that they are going to be going to London to play this game, so overseas games can always just cause some strange things to happen. I'm not really too worried about it though with Diggs. And then my wide receiver 4, we will have AJ Brown here, who also dominated this past week. Now he definitely has a tougher matchup going up against the Los Angeles Rams, who have been really good against the wide receivers so far in the year. But AJ Brown is a guy who can overcome any matchup, and they don't have any physical guy to match up against him, so it should be another spot for him to crush. After AJ, we're going to have Amon-Ra St. Brown here. Now he was a do not practice on the first practice reports of the week, so we're going to want to monitor his situation throughout the week. He did play Thursday night last week though, so there is a good chance that he had more time to rest, but should help him out some. But a really consistent guy for your lineup. He doesn't quite have the same upside as some of the guys ahead of him, but he's been just consistent top 10 wide receiver basically every single week. Now they are playing the Carolina Panthers, which is a tougher matchup than he has had, but he's not really someone who I'm too worried about it. So if Amon-Ra plays, I think it's going to be another good week for him. And then the last guy in this tier is going to be Devontae Adams. He had a late round drafted rookie playing at quarterback for him this past week, and he still balled out. So I think we're just going to be confident with him regardless of who's playing the quarterback position for him. Now, he will have a relatively tough matchup with the Green Bay Packers going up against Jair Alexander, but they actually haven't been very good at stopping wide receivers this year. And honestly, there's not really anyone that can guard Devontae, so I think he'll be just fine. And that's obviously why I got him in my tier 2. Now, moving on to tier 3, I'm going to start it off with Jamar Chase, who, I mean, this whole situation, I think we all know about it at this point. It's just really ugly with everything that's going on. Now, this week they are playing the Arizona Cardinals, who have definitely been a lot better than I think most people expected. And with no T. Higgins in the lineup, Jamar honestly should get like 15 targets, and regardless of how good those targets are, I think that he'll be able to produce with them. And Joe Burrow, he didn't re-aggravate his injury this past week, but he just does not look whatsoever like himself. I don't think that this will affect Jamar's ranking too much, just because overall my expectations for him are lower than what they were coming into this season, but he's still just too talented and getting enough volume where he'll be good for fantasy this week. My wide receiver 8, I'm going to have CeeDee Lamb here, who has also been balling out these past 2 weeks. He's just going up against the Niners, so that's a really tough matchup for every single person on the field, so I have also lowered my expectations for him this week. But another guy who is just the main focal point of the offense. He's too talented where you're not going to sit him, obviously, but just move him down my rankings a little bit this week. And the last guy I got in this tier 3 is going to be Puka Nacua. And obviously, once Cooper Kupp is back playing, he will take over the main role in the wide receiver room for this team. But I don't think that Puka is going to be going anywhere. I think that he's still going to be very, very involved in this offense and will still be a good wide receiver 2 for your team. But until Kupp is fully healthy and fully back, I'm going to keep ranking Puka as a top 10 wide receiver. And then on to my next tier, my wide receiver 10, I'm going to have Jaylen Waddle here right now. Now, he has definitely not been what I think most people were expecting coming into the season. He did miss one game, which was due to a concussion, and that was the game where the Dolphins scored 70 points. So unfortunately, he wasn't able to be a part of that offensive output. And overall, so far this year, he just has not been very good whatsoever. But we have seen it. We know how talented he is and how good this offense is. One of his explosion games is coming soon. It definitely could be this week. Going up against the New York Giants, not really defense that I'm scared of at all. And I'm really hoping that Jaylen Waddle can get on track this week, because if not, we're going to have to move him down the rankings. And next up is going to be Devonta Smith, obviously the same team as AJ Brown. They're going up against the Los Angeles Rams this week. which is a tough matchup like I talked about. But this offense, they can all overcome any tough matchups, and the Rams are a tough matchup, but not one of the hardest, so I'm not really too worried about it. I think as we have seen over the past couple of weeks, AJ Brown is still the main target in this offense. It is still his wide receiving core to own, and Devonta Smith will have good games, no doubt about it, but AJ Brown is the alpha in this offense, and we just can't forget that. Devonta Smith, though, still really good, still obviously has his opportunities, so you're just going to want to keep playing Devonta Smith. Trust me, it'll be good in the long run. Next up is going to be Brandon Aiyuk. He had another really good week this past week, and very interesting because Kittle and Debo combined for 1 target in total, where CMC and Aiyuk just got basically everything. Now, CMC is the main part of this offense. He's going to get most of the work every single week, but I think if everyone's healthy, from what we've seen this year so far, Brandon Aiyuk is the main target in this offense. This offense is one that can overcome basically any matchup. They are playing the Dallas Cowboys this week, so a really good defense, but it's not really something that I'm that worried for this offense. And so as long as Brandon Aiyuk is healthy, I think he's going to be a top 15 wide receiver this year. Next up, I'm going to have Chris Olave here, who had a really bad week this past week. I don't really think it's because of him. It's mostly because of Derek Carr and his shoulder injury. Just not really being able to throw the ball downfield whatsoever. I don't know exactly what they're doing with that right now. I don't know how much healthier he's gotten, if they're thinking about sitting him this week, if he's still not healthy. But I think they saw how bad their offense was, and they're definitely going to want to make some adjustments, try to force feed the ball to Olave more. And honestly, they just missed on a massive touchdown that would have totally saved his day. Now they're playing the New England Patriots, so that is definitely a tougher matchup, but they have also been kind of middle of the road this year on defense, so honestly, I'm not really too scared about it. And the last guy I'm going to have in this tier who ranked pretty highly this week is going to be Michael Pittman Jr. He did struggle this past week, but it was a relatively tough matchup. He did struggle this past week, but they were playing the Rams, pretty tough matchup like I've talked about with the Eagles. But this week they're playing the Tennessee Titans, which is one of the easiest matchups for wide receivers, so I think this should be a spot where Michael Pittman can really take advantage of that defense. And we've seen him this year be extremely good with this offense. He's obviously the clear main target. He's gotten like 8 to 10 targets in multiple games so far this year. And I think that this is going to be one of those spots where Michael Pittman helps you win your week. Now, moving on to the next tier, guys, this is definitely a really weird tier. A lot of guys with a lot more question marks at this point. But first guy I'm going to have up is going to be Deebo Samuel. Obviously had a really tough week this past week, getting basically no targets. I honestly think that he just wasn't fully healthy this past week. It was very questionable the entire week leading up to it, and then he was active, but they seemed like he was just being used more as a decoy. I think that this week they're going to need him a lot more, so he should be utilized, and we've seen what he can still do for fantasy, so it's going to be another spot where he should be more valuable for the offense. But when you're playing Deebo, you obviously run the risk of just not being utilized at all because there are so many weapons in this offense. And after Deebo, I'm going to have Calvin Ridley here, who saved his week last week with a touchdown in the very beginning, but just has not really been targeted like what we saw in week 1 and what we were kind of hoping for. Now, he didn't basically play football for a year and a half, almost 2 years. So I'm hoping there's just still a little bit of rust we're knocking off, because we've definitely seen the flashes. I mean, week 1, he looked unbelievable, and we just have not seen the same thing since then. They are also playing the Buffalo Bills, which is a really good defense, so that is definitely scary. Now, they did just lose Tre'Davious White for the season, so that definitely helps out with this receiving core, but we're definitely going to need to see some more stuff from Calvin Ridley to really have more faith in him going forward. After Ridley, I'm going to have Terry McLaurin playing on Thursday night against Chicago Bears, so a really favorable matchup for all the positions. I think we've seen so far in this offense that Terry McLaurin is a clear lead target. I personally think that they are using Jahan Dotson completely wrong, but I'm also not an NFL offensive coordinator, so I mean, what do I know? But this is a very plus matchup, like I mentioned, so I think that Terry's going to be able to dominate, get open, going to have time to pass the ball. Should be a good week for him. After Terry, I'm going to have Nico Collins here. Now, first off, CJ Stroud has looked legit. He has looked so good. It's been awesome to see for fantasy and just for the NFL in general, and that has obviously been a main factor as to why Nico Collins has been so relevant for fantasy. Now, Tank Dell has also looked really good, so there definitely could be some kind of fight for who's the main wide receiver in this offense, but Nico Collins, like a 6'3", big-bodied guy, so I think that he can be a little bit easier target for CJ Stroud. They're playing the Atlanta Falcons, which have actually been really good against wide receivers on the year so far, so he could get that AJ Terrell matchup, which could be an issue for him, but I think with what we've seen so far on the season, you're just going to want to keep playing him as a wide receiver too. And then the last guy I'm going to have in this tier is going to be Garrett Wilson going up against the Denver Broncos. Pretty much the main reason why he's in here right now. I mean, Zach Wilson did look much better than I think we've ever seen him look. So if he can continue to play like that, I think Garrett Wilson will be really good. I mean, not really good, obviously, given what we all had the expectations for him going into the year, but will be a lot better than what people seemed like it could have been the past couple weeks. He also got like 13, 14 targets, which is very encouraging to see. And so I think in a really plus matchup, this should be a good spot for Garrett Wilson to really show out. Moving on to the next tier, and to start off my wide receiver 20, I'm going to have Zay Flowers here. Kind kind of tough guy, honestly, to figure out right now. It's always really difficult with these wide receivers in Baltimore. But last week seemed like a week where he could do really well because Rashad Bateman and Odell Beckham were both out, but he really didn't do much besides one really big catch. And then the other weeks he's been getting insane target volume, but hasn't been really like efficient with them, but still been producing for fantasy because there's been so much volume. And he really passes the eye test if you watch him, but he also hasn't found his first touchdown of his NFL career. So a lot of weird things going on with him. And then this week they're playing the Pittsburgh Steelers, who is a really good matchup for wide receivers. So that is encouraging, but it's also a division game, which can always really lead to some weird stuff. And the over-under is like 36.5 or something, 38.5. So it's really low. They don't think it's going to be a high scoring game whatsoever. And so those factors definitely scare me. But I think with the amount of volume he is getting and a part of a pretty good offense and only improving young wide receiver, I think you're going to be wanting to have him in most of your lineup. And then next up, we're going to have DJ Moore here, who has been really good, honestly, for fantasy after that first week. Had an absolutely insane touchdown grab this past week. Now, they were playing the Denver Broncos, who we have seen now are one of the worst defenses in the entire NFL. This week, they're going up against the Washington Commanders, who have also not been very difficult for wide receivers to do good against. And so as long as Justin Fields can play remotely like he did this past week, I think DJ Moore should be fine for fantasy. And then after DJ Moore, I'm going to have Christian Kirk here, who has been getting insane target volume after that first week. This receiving core has been pretty weird so far this year because we thought really was going to be the clear guy. He kind of was, and now he kind of wasn't. And then Christian Kirk wasn't supposed to be playing on 2 wide receiver sets. We saw that week 1 that he wasn't, and then Zay Jones got hurt, and now Christian Kirk has been, but he's been producing. So the whole thing has just been really weird. I think that Calvin Ridley and Christian Kirk are both solid plays every single week. Obviously, Calvin Ridley has a higher upside, but I think Christian Kirk has a higher floor at this point. So they can both definitely be in your lineup. I guess if you have both, it kind of just depends about what you need. Obviously, I'm going to be playing Ridley most weeks because I want to try to win my matchups. I want those high upside guys, but Christian Kirk is definitely a solid start at this point. After him, I'm going to have Gabe Davis, another really high upside guy, although he has looked a lot better this year than he has in the previous years, at least in the sense of being more consistent week over week. And he's scored touchdowns the past 2 weeks, which is really good to see. Obviously tied to Josh Allen, who looks like arguably the best quarterback in the NFL right now. And they're also playing the Jacksonville Jaguars. I've talked about it with a couple different guys, but tough matchup. Kind of middle of the road matchup, honestly, but going over to London and then having to play over there is just kind of always a mess. So definitely a little bit worried about that. But overall, I think Gabe Davis is a really good high upside play. And then the last guy I'm going to have in this tier is going to be George Pickens, who had a really bad week this past week against what seemed like a plus matchup, but honestly, maybe Houston just isn't that good of a matchup like we thought, because it seems like they've been shutting down a lot of wide receivers, and this year they actually have to throw on them. So maybe Houston is actually just a good defense. This week they're playing Baltimore, so they're actually kind of a middle of the road defense. They're not amazing, they're not bad, but it should be a spot where George Pickens can do solid. I just don't think they gave him enough volume last week when they really needed it. And it sounds like Kenny isn't going to play this week, but I don't really think that Mitchell Trubisky is that much of a downgrade. So I think that George Pickens should be just fine this week. Then moving on to my last tier, I'm going to start off with Christian Watson. He played his first game this past week, which was definitely encouraging to see. Was not on the field very much, which kind of makes sense since he's coming off a hamstring. He was on a short week. Now he's had 10 days to heal, so he should be pretty much fully ready to go, but I'm still not totally confident in him coming off that hamstring. I want to see him actually play a full allotment of snaps until I kind of rank him as such, but he just has such a high upside that I got him ranked here at my wide receiver 25. Now they are playing the Las Vegas Raiders, so it is a really good matchup, so that definitely helps. After him, I got Marquise Brown going up against the Cincinnati Bengals. This offense has just looked so much better than I think it's just weird because I've mentioned this every single time we talk about the Cardinals, but it has just been so surprising. Everyone thought they were going to be the worst team in the NFL, and that is obviously not the case. And Marquise Brown did solid this past week. We'll have to see if Michael Wilson gets more and more involved since he balled out this past week, but until that really actually happens, I think Marquise Brown is a solid flex play at this point. After him, I'm going to have Jacoby Myers here going up against the Green Bay Packers, but I don't think he's going to get covered by Jair Alexander. I imagine that'll mostly be Devontae Adams, so it could be a spot for Jacoby to really ball out. And this offense adds, it hasn't been very good, but it honestly is exactly what we want to see for fantasy. Very consolidation of targets. There's like 75 to 80% of targets going to Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers, and Josh Jacobs. And that is absolutely beautiful to see. They are all very relevant for fantasy because of that. And that's part of the reason why Jacoby Myers has been so good for fantasy so far, where he's getting like 8 to 10 targets basically every single week. Now, no matter who you are, that's going to make you fantasy relevant, but he's been producing with them too. So he's going to be another good flex play every single week going forward. After him, I'm going to have Romeo Doubs on the other side of the ball. A lot of what I talked about with Christian Watson, very favorable matchup, but it seems like Romeo Doubs is the #1 target in this offense, at least like in the sense of getting the most volume. If you were watching before the season, I kind of talked about this, where I think that Romeo Doubs was going to be the #1 target, but I think Christian Watson will still be the most valuable just because of the way that he is used and how athletic he is. But that doesn't mean Romeo Doubs isn't going to be valuable. I think they're both going to be solid for fantasy, and especially with Jordan Love looking at least decent, then that's definitely going to be helpful. But Romeo Doubs should be getting 10 targets every single week going forward, and in a good matchup against the Raiders, I think that he could have another really solid performance. Another really surprise of the season so far, I'm going to have Adam Thielen here, my wide receiver 29. He has honestly really been producing. He's able to get open, which I didn't think he really had anymore, and this offense doesn't really have a lot of people like that, so he's been getting targeted a ton. They're also playing the Detroit Lions this week, who have a really good run defense, but not the best pass defense, so they're going to have to pass the ball. The Lions also have a good offense, so they're going to have to pass the ball even more to try to keep up, so I think all of this just leads to Adam Thielen having another good week for fantasy. And then the last guy in my top 30, I'm going to have DeAndre Hopkins here going up against the Indianapolis Colts, who have been really bad against wide receivers so far. And so I know with how bad DeAndre Hopkins has been, it can definitely be scary, and I'm not like excited to play him, but you can definitely flex him if you need to. There are definitely a couple guys outside of this top 30 who I think are definitely at least worth mentioning. Guys like Tank Dell, Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, even Jordan Addison. With how bad he did last week, I still think he's definitely a flexible guy. So if you want to play any of those guys over any of the people in tier 7, I can definitely understand that. If you have questions about specific people, just let me know down below and I'll get back to you. But yeah, here are my top 30. Let me know what you guys think about them. If you watch all the way through, make sure you drop a like on the video. It really helps me out a ton. Also subscribe to the channel. I'll have content like this coming the entire year, so just make sure you guys stick around. All right, see you later.